This is the Konica Hexar RF. It's a Leica M-mount rangefinder that first released in 1999. It's a relatively new film camera, you could say, and it features a lot of things that a later developed film camera would have, like DX code reading, automatic film loading and rewinding, and even auto exposure lock. This is definitely one of the more digital feeling film cameras I've used, and there's some pros and cons to that, which I'll get into later on in this video. But generally speaking, this is an often overlooked Leica M rangefinder, and it's probably one that maybe not a lot of people know about. The Leica M6 certainly takes a lot of the spotlight away from other rangefinders. I think we can all agree. So the best way I can actually describe this camera is it's basically what you would get if a Leica M6 and a Contax G2 had a child. That's this. I've actually owned this camera for close to 2 years now, and maybe some of you don't know that, and probably for good reason, because I don't use this camera as much as I would like to. I've brought it on a few trips, most notably London and Japan, and I feel like I did that as a way to force myself to use this camera. Prefacing this video saying that, it sounds like I don't like this camera, but that's not the case. It has more to do with my complicated relationship with shooting film.
I'm so used to shooting digital. I took a shot and it did this, thinking they're the playback buttons.
And the fact that I have way too many cameras. I think I've used this camera enough now that I can talk confidently about it and my experience using it, and what I think about the camera for something like street photography. Like I mentioned before, this is a very digital feeling camera. You have the option to shoot fully manual, of course, but it does have an aperture priority setting, and I've used that pretty much all the time when I use this camera. It's really allowed me to focus less on worrying about getting my exposure right and putting more attention into getting the composition I want and getting my subject in focus, because this is still a manual focus camera. However, I think it is a nice balance between not having to think so much about getting my exposure right and still having to, concentrate on getting critical focus. It's a nice balance of, slowing down, but also having some speed to the shooting process.
It's a Type 35 millimeter.
And with not only auto exposure, but auto exposure lock, I can simply point this camera in the direction of where I want to meter, half press the shutter to lock the exposure, and reframe my composition freely. It's a center weighted meter, and you also have this handy exposure compensation dial as well. And so in most cases, because film favors overexposure, I like to meter more for the shadows and let the camera dictate what shutter speed to use according to the aperture I have it set to. The camera does a pretty good job deciding what the shutter speed should be to get a good exposure.
The camera didn't take a shot. It didn't go. So that's the thing, it's electric, right? So sometimes if your exposure is off, it won't shoot.
Now, while auto exposure is great to have on a camera, I do sometimes find it bugging out sometimes, especially when I'm kind of shooting very quickly, moving and taking a photo. Sometimes it won't take a photo because the camera, I guess, is having a hard time figuring out where to expose and what to make the shutter speed. So sometimes it doesn't fire off when I'm moving very quickly. So I think auto exposure on this camera is definitely better suited to a slower pace shooting style. Loading this camera is so easy because it's fully automatic. And when you're done with your roll, it will automatically rewind when you hit this little button on the side of the camera.
Pretty easy loading.
So all I need to do is stretch out the film roll to this point. It will automatically wind the film once I close the door if there's a DX code on the film. I've been getting a lot of compliments from you guys about my music choices in my videos, which, first of all, thank you. I really appreciate you guys having the same taste in music as I do. But a big reason I have all this great music to use in my videos is because of MusicBed, today's sponsor. I've been using MusicBed to source music for my YouTube videos for the last 2 years, and it's by far the best catalog of music, in my opinion, with over 60,000 songs to choose from. Ever since I started making videos, I quickly realized how important music is in storytelling and in creating the kind of emotions I want a video to have. In a lot of cases, I actually let music dictate how I'm going to edit a video. Quite literally, to how the music tempo changes will be where I will cut to another shot. But more importantly to me, it's the feelings that you get from a good piece of music that can really take, footage that is already good. Won't lie, pretty good at the filmmaking, I think. But music, it takes it one step further. Shooting around Central Park under those autumn colors, I couldn't help but have jazz playing in the back of my head. Yeah, I think I knew when I was out there filming what kind of genre of music I wanted to have in this video. And with MusicBed, it's super easy to find that perfect song. Using their filtering options, I can choose jazz and even choose my favorite instrument, the saxophone, of course. So if you're a filmmaker or YouTube creator like myself, and you're looking for great music to use in your videos, consider trying out MusicBed. You can use the link in the description to get a 14-day free trial. Thanks again to MusicBed for sponsoring today's video. Hexar RF has a 0.6 magnification viewfinder with frame line pairs for 28mm and 90mm, 35mm and 135mm, and 50mm with 75mm. Although with the 0.6 magnification, it's definitely a viewfinder better suited for like a 28 or a 35. And it's a really nice viewfinder. It's large and bright, and it's actually a direct copy of Leica's viewfinder. The size of the body is also very comparable to a Leica. Here's the Hexar next to a Leica M3. The Hexar is much lighter because of the material of the body, and I'd say ergonomically it's more comfortable to hold in the hand because it has that rubber exterior, as well as this slight protrusion in the front. Although, if we're going to compare this camera to other cameras, the better comparison is probably the Contax G2, which honestly this camera is trying to copy. Now, I've never used a Contax G2 personally, but from what I've heard, it does pretty much everything this camera does, but better. As of today's date, on October 2024, the Konica Hexar body goes for around $1,200, and the Contax G2 body goes for around $1,500. Although with the Contax, you are limited to just the Contax lenses, whereas with the Konica Hexar, it's like an M mount, so you have a lot more options in terms of lenses, and you can get non-branded Leica M mount lenses, and they can be pretty cheap. So I think the Hexar RF is a great gateway camera to a Leica film camera. It's kind of the camera you would get if you plan on getting a Leica M6 maybe in the future, or maybe you already have a Leica and you've already invested in, Leica lenses and you want something that's similar to a shooting experience of a Contax G2, but still want to take advantage of all the Leica lenses you've invested in. I think the Konica Hexar is probably your best bet. Now, this being a very digital feeling film camera, it does have its drawbacks. And one is just that, it feels like a digital camera. Whenever I shoot with this, it doesn't really have that film shooting experience that we all know and love. There's something so tactile and analog feeling to having like a film advance lever. You don't have that here, and what you have feels more like a digital camera. This soft button that doesn't really have much travel when you press into it. There's also a very digital sounding shutter, which you either love or hate. I personally don't mind it, but it definitely doesn't compete to this sound. And lastly, of course, it's fully electronic, so without a battery, you pretty much have an expensive paperweight. And so you're gonna need to bring extra batteries when you go out to shoot. You also run the risk of, internally, those electronics could go bad at any second. So I do sometimes feel like it's a ticking time bomb, which is not the best feeling to have about a camera, I'll be honest. Now, some of these are small drawbacks, or maybe they're not, because I feel like the biggest reason a lot of people get into shooting film, and my biggest reason, to be honest, is the experience of slowing down, the tactile analog-like experience of film cameras that you have. Those are reasons I particularly like to shoot film for, and I don't get a lot of that with this camera. But that's just me, and looking past all of that, this camera is really good. And if you're looking at something that's on the cheaper side in terms of rangefinders that are like a M mount, it's definitely up there. It pretty much does everything a Leica M6 does, but half the price. I'm curious if any of you have used this camera before, what your experience is like, so definitely share in the comments, and let me know in the comments if you want to see more film related content, because I feel like I haven't done a lot of that recently, mainly because I haven't been shooting a lot of film, but I plan to change that, especially this winter. So yeah, let me know if there's any film cameras that I might already have that you want to see videos about, or any film stocks that might make for interesting videos. Drop it in the comments. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.